don't have to go to Italy to walk through the Roman Empire. This is Trier, Germany, a city that became one of Rome's most important centers north of the Alps. Today we're exploring what's still standing nearly 2,000 years later, from massive Roman monuments to imperial buildings, ancient baths, and a bridge that still carries traffic today. Our first stop is the Constantine Basilica. And if you're thinking this looks less like a basilica and more like somebody built the world's largest brick shoebox, you're not entirely wrong. This was originally the Aula Palatina, built in the early 4th century during the reign of Emperor Constantine the Great. And this wasn't just a church. This was an imperial throne hall designed to remind anyone walking through these doors exactly who was in charge. And the scale is ridiculous. The hall is about 67 meters long, 27 meters wide, and more than 30 meters high. Remember, they built this 17 centuries ago without cranes, power tools, or a Bauhaus down the street. At the far end is the enormous Apse, where the emperor would have appeared before officials and visitors. The architecture was deliberately intimidating. You enter this giant open space, look forward towards the throne, and Constantine was sitting there basically saying, "Yes, I'm considerably more important than you are." The Romans even heated this place. Beneath the floor was a hypocaust system that circulated hot air because apparently being Roman emperor meant central heating was a basic human right. What's really interesting, though, is how different the interior looks today. The original Roman building would have been far more elaborate with marble, mosaics, and statues and decorations. What we see now is a result of an extremely long and occasionally violent history. After the Roman Empire faded from Trier, the building was repeatedly altered and eventually incorporated into the residence of the Archbishop Electors of Trier. Much later in the 19th century, the Prussians restored it closer to its Roman form and turned it into a Protestant church. Then World War II arrived because apparently this building hadn't been through enough already. Trier was bombed, the basilica was badly damaged, and much of the interior burned. It was rebuilt after the war, giving us the enormous, relatively stark interior you see today. So this one building has been a Roman imperial throne hall, part of a medieval and Baroque palace, and survived war and destruction, and today serves as a church. Not bad for a 1,700-year-old brick shoebox.
And coming out of the basilica, the scenery changes pretty dramatically. Right next door is the Electoral Palace, and if you're thinking this looks absolutely nothing like the massive Roman brick building we just walked out of, you'd be absolutely correct. This beautiful Baroque palace was the residence of the Electors of Trier, some of the most powerful churchmen in the Holy Roman Empire. And the contrast here is almost ridiculous. On one side, you have Constantine's enormous Roman imperial audience hall built to project the power of the emperor. And on the other, you have this incredible ornate palace built more than 1,000 years later to project the power and wealth of an archbishop. And they didn't exactly treat the Roman building as priceless archaeological monument that we would today. Parts of the old basilica were actually incorporated into the palace complex over the centuries. So standing right here, you can actually see that Trier's historical history stacked on top of itself. Roman Empire, medieval archbishops, the Holy Roman Empire, and then the explosion of the Baroque architecture. Honestly, it's one of the strangest architectural pairings in Trier. Constantine's giant brick power statement sitting right next to something that looks like it was designed by someone who thought, you know what, this needs more pink and more statues. And now we're going to keep moving because Trier still has a lot more Roman history waiting for us. All right, behind me is the Römerbrücke, Trier's Roman bridge. And this might be the ultimate example of Roman engineering showing off. The stone piers behind me were built around the 2nd century AD, nearly 2,000 years, and we're still using them. Cars, buses, delivery trucks, all casually driving across Roman foundations like this is just completely normal. Now, obviously, the top of the bridge has been rebuilt over the centuries. The Romans did not design things with BMWs and Mercedes doing 50 kilometers an hour across it. But those massive basalt piers down in the Moselle, Roman, which means some engineer almost 2,000 years ago apparently looked at the plan and said, make it strong enough for chariots. And his buddy said, how strong? And he said, I don't know. Strong enough for whatever the Germans invent in 1,800 years. Mission accomplished. Empires collapsed. Medieval kingdoms came and went. Napoleon showed up. Germany unified. 2 world wars happened. The bridge, it's still here. So while a lot of Roman Trier survives today as ruins, this is different. This thing still has a job. And after roughly 1,800 years, the Römerbrücke apparently has absolutely zero intention on retiring. All right, we've had enough Baroque elegance for one afternoon. It's time to get back to what we came here to Trier for, the Romans. We're heading to the Barbara Baths built in the 2nd century AD, when Trier was becoming one of the most important cities north of the Alps. And these weren't some little neighborhood bathhouse where a couple of legionnaires stopped by to rinse off after work. These were enormous. One of the largest Roman bath complexes anywhere in the empire. At its peak, you would have had hot baths, warm baths, cold baths, exercise areas, changing rooms, and probably 700 naked Romans arguing about politics and complaining about taxes. So basically a modern German spa, just with fewer rules posted on the wall. The Romans took bathing extremely serious. This wasn't just about getting clean. You came here to exercise, socialize, conduct business, hear the latest gossip, and spend several hours avoiding whatever responsibilities were waiting for you at home. Unfortunately, after nearly 1,900 years, the Barbara Baths aren't exactly offering spa packages anymore. What survives today is mostly the foundations and ruins of what was once an absolutely massive complex, but that's part of what makes Trier so incredible. You can walk a few minutes from an Imperial Roman throne hall past a Baroque palace, and suddenly you're standing in what was essentially a gigantic 2nd century wellness center. No reservations required, and sadly, no complimentary bathrobe.
After spending the afternoon wandering around Roman ruins and learning far more about ancient bathing habits than I ever expected, it was time for something refreshing, and fortunately, Trier has apparently figured out how to combine my 2 favorite things, Roman history and beer. We headed to Kraftport's Kreativ Bierbar because they actually serve Roman-themed beer brewed right here in Trier. First up, Memento Mori, Latin for remember you must die. The bar itself has a really cool, retro vibe, packed with quirky decorations that give it a ton of character, and the service was fantastic, genuinely friendly, welcoming, and more than happy to talk beer. Definitely my kind of place. Next up, Fiat Lux, Let There Be Light. A little more optimistic than remember you're going to die. And after a long day of exploring Trier and a couple of Roman beers to finish things off, my wife and I are definitely ready to call it a night. We're going to get some rest and we'll pick things right back up in the morning, very early.
Good morning from Trier. It's approximately 6:30 in the morning because apparently I now get up before the Germans to look at the Roman ruins. Behind me is the Kaiserthermen, one of the largest Roman bath complexes ever built outside of Rome. Construction began in the early 4th century when Trier was an imperial residence and one of the most important cities in the Roman Empire. And when they call these baths, we're not talking about a little neighborhood swimming pool. This place had enormous heated halls, hot baths, cold baths, underground service corridors, the full Roman luxury package. Although interestingly, the original bath complex was never apparently completed as intended. Parts of it were later converted for other uses, spolia, which means the Romans spent an absolute fortune building one of the biggest spas in Europe and then basically said, you know what, never mind. But coming here at 0630 in the morning has one major advantage. I have this entire place to myself. No tour groups, no selfie sticks, no guy standing directly in the middle of this intersection with me for every single shot every 17 minutes. Just me, the Kaiserthermen, and several extremely confused Germans in the background passing by, wondering why this American is talking to himself in front of a camera before breakfast. You can see not a ton going on here at before 7 in the morning on a Sunday here in Germany. It's very quiet. I'm the only one on the streets right now. Didn't sleep very well last night. So the hotel is advertised, had an air conditioning. So I guess what they meant by air conditioning was like a blower. It blew air. However, it was definitely not cold. So, okay, let's just adapt. And what I went ahead and did was open the door, the window, door balcony that led to nowhere, so we can at least get some fresh air in. And that was also a fail, because to do that, it also let in a ton of strange noises. I don't know what people were outside on the street screaming about. And I'm definitely not what I would say a light sleeper. I slept in a tent next to a 5K generator for years. So, and also next to a dust off area. So I definitely don't consider myself a light sleeper, but unfortunately I still had a little bit of problems with the heat plus the noise getting a good night's sleep. But that's okay, because I really wanted to get out here this morning and do this. I pretty much dedicated the weekend to making this video. This is my now third attempt at making a good YouTube video, something interesting. I kind of went off for like, what do I think that I would find interesting to watch, and applied it to this. So we'll see how it goes. It is completely dead down here. As you can see, there's the American Embassy on the left. It's marked by the golden arches. Might have to check that out later. So I just passed a couple of nice guys. They didn't want to be on camera, but I asked them, what's it like working here every Sunday morning? I guess I should have prefaced that with it's the two guys that are like cleaning up the ground, working for the city. And they said, in no uncertain terms, that, people just leave stuff everywhere overnight. And they come in the morning and they sweep up all the cigarette butts. Cigarette smoking is still a huge thing here. I don't know how that's still a thing anywhere in Western world. But anyway, they spend the morning sweeping up cigarette butts, hosing off vomit, and basically trying to make this an acceptable situation for families and other people from the city, tourists here in the morning as the day starts to pick up. And now you can see why we wanted to come here and why this is a symbol of Trier. The Porta Nigra was built around 170 AD when Trier was the Roman city of Augusta Treverorum. And nearly 1,900 years later, an enormous amount of the original Roman structure is still standing. The name Porta Nigra literally means the Black Gate. Although that's not what the Romans called it. The name came after centuries later as the original pale sandstone gradually darkened. And look at the size of this thing. Just imagine arriving here in the 2nd century, approaching one of the wealthiest cities north of the Alps, and this is the gate you have to pass through. It's imposing. No concrete, no modern mortar holding the blocks together. The Romans fitted these enormous sandstone blocks together and secured them with iron clamps. And somehow, it still survived. Part of the reason is actually pretty bizarre. In the Middle Ages, the Porta Nigra was converted into a church, which helped save it from being dismantled for building material like so many other Roman structures. Then Napoleon came in the early 1800s and ordered the medieval additions removed, essentially turning it back into the Roman monument we see today. So for this clip, I kind of wanted to keep myself out of the picture as much as possible so you could see the Porta Nigra itself. There's another reason the Porta matters to us. This gate tells us just how important Roman Trier actually was. Today, Trier feels like a relatively small German city, but in late antiquity, it became one of the great political centers of the Roman West. By the late 3rd and 4th century, after the Christian conversion, Roman emperors were actually living and governing from here. They could oversee the Rhine frontier and administer enormous territories across the Western Empire. At its height, Trier had imperial palaces, enormous public baths, an amphitheater, a massive circus for chariot racing, temples, bridges, aqueducts, and the defensive walls. So imagine approaching this city 1,800 years ago. You wouldn't see the Porta standing by itself like we do today. This was connected to a massive Roman city wall stretching kilometers around Trier with multiple monumental gates controlling access to this city. And once you pass through here, you'd be entering a bustling Roman metropolis filled with soldiers, merchants, government officials, and travelers from across the empire. So as you can see behind me, the sun is yet rising again on the Roman Empire.
And just when you think we finally left the Roman Trier behind, we arrive at the Trier Cathedral, and even here, Rome isn't finished with us yet. The cathedral traces its origins back to the 4th century, when a huge Christian church complex was built here during the age of Constantine. Parts of that Roman structure were eventually incorporated into the cathedral we see today. So underneath all of this medieval architecture is yet another piece of Roman Trier. After spending all this time looking at what the Romans left behind, I started wondering, what would they think of Trier today? 2,000 years ago, this was an imperial capital, emperors, palaces, monumental baths, enormous city gates. And today we have graffiti, questionable nightlife, and apparently several establishments Constantine probably wouldn't have mentioned in the imperial tourism brochure. Then again, knowing the Romans, they'd probably take one look around and say, actually, this all seems pretty familiar. And then there was our hotel. You know, Karl Marx was born in Trier, and suddenly it all made sense. Brutalist architecture, air conditioning that worked only in theory, 0 rooms ready by 3 p.m., and 1 pillow for 2 people. Apparently, even the pillows had to be collectively owned. And after 2 days following the Romans around Trier, there was only one thing left to do: eat. So before heading home, we stopped at Adana Ocakbaşı for their Sunday Turkish brunch buffet, and this was easily one of the best surprises of this trip. The spread was enormous: eggs, cheeses, fresh bread, olives, grapes, burek, meats, vegetables, pastries, basically enough food to provision a Roman legion. And strangely enough, it's a fitting place to end a Roman weekend. Grapes and olives were staples of the Roman Mediterranean, and even burek belongs to the long tradition of filled and layered pastries that developed across the former Roman world. So after 2,000 years, apparently the Mediterranean still knows how to do breakfast better than the rest of us. If you're in Trier on a Sunday, I absolutely recommend stopping here. The food was fantastic, the selection was huge, and it was the perfect way to finish the weekend. Roman ruins, Roman beer, Turkish breakfast. I'd say Trier treated us pretty well. Thanks for coming along, and if you enjoyed this trip, hit like, subscribe to Valentinus, and we'll see you on the next one.